tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, and welcome to tonight's webinar, Insights into Clean Sport Parenting from Neuroscience and Psychology. My name is Kelly Kerr, and I will be your host for this evening. I'd like to start off with Sport New Zealand karakia, and this karakia is about bringing us together, settling us into this kaupapa. So tu taua mai I runga, tu taua mai I raro, tu taua mai I roto, tu taua mai I waho, kia tau ai te Māori tū, kia tau ai te Māori ora, tutu whakamoa kia tēnā, haumie, huie, tai kie. So I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Lots of people from all around New Zealand. And not sure, we may have some people dialing in from overseas. Look, I'm really excited about tonight's session, and I'm sure that you will get a lot from our special guest, Dr. Sian Clancy. This webinar is part of a series that we run to support Balance is Better, which is Sport New Zealand's philosophy for youth sport. And hopefully many of you will have heard about Balance is Better. But for those who haven't, Balance is Better is our national framework for youth sport. It's about ensuring young people receive quality experiences regardless of their needs or motivations or our ability. It's about keeping young people in sport, focusing on process and mastery rather than outcomes, a focus on fun and supporting young people to reach their potential, whatever that might be. And we all play a role here, whether we're sports administrators, whether we're coaches, and particularly important for our kōrero tonight, parents and whānau. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our special guest for this evening, Dr. Sian Clancy. So Sian and I go back quite a way into, and I horribly say, the early 2000s at Christchurch Netball Centre. And so it is absolutely wonderful to be able to connect again on this webinar. Sian is the GM of Athlete Services team at Drug Free Sport New Zealand, and she contributes her expertise as a member of the World Anti-Doping Agency's Education Committee, its Technical Working Groups for Education, and Social Science Research Expert Advisory Group. So tonight we're going to talk about clean sport parenting, and we've got about 6 or so different topics to cover and some tips and hacks for parents. So Sian, welcome. Amazing to have you, and I'll hand over to you. So can you just share a bit about yourself and the work and research that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So just firstly, thank you so much to the Balance is Better team for having me on tonight. It's a real privilege. But yeah, just a little bit around, I guess, what I do at Drug Free Sport New Zealand. So I've been there over 7 years now. And currently I look after both the education and sample collection teams, or otherwise known as testing. And we have a big focus on supporting clean athletes and clean sport. So we really want to promote things like this and engagement with audiences that look after, that support and influence athletes of all ages. And we really want to engage everyone in a wider conversation about clean sport. I recently completed my PhD, and that was on the factors which influence supplement use and doping for the purpose of enhancing performance. And I did that with rangatahi throughout New Zealand. So pretty relevant to our conversation tonight. And that included the voices of over 1,300 teams throughout the country. So, hopefully a pretty good representation of what's going on out there. But yeah, just before we get into it, just thank you all so much for investing your time in this really important conversation. It's really awesome to see so many people interested in supporting rangatahi through this. So yeah, thank you.
Outstanding. So I think looking at the numbers, about 330 on the call tonight. So, just reinforcing that. Thank you everyone for coming on and giving up your time. Now, one thing I heard you talk about as part of your role was around testing, and I just wanted to clear up that that's not part of what we're going to be talking about tonight, is it?
No, it's not. We are really focusing on parents' influence, parents' roles, and how they can support their rangatahi in clean sport. And primarily we're here to talk about the cognitive processes and some just tips from a real practical environment that coaches, parents, administrators, anyone working with teams can implement from today.
Cool, awesome. And if people wanted to find out any more testing stuff, there's Drug Free Sport New Zealand website and things like that they can access that information.
Absolutely, there's heaps on there to find out more about any aspect of what we do actually, but yeah, particularly doping control and all relevant aspects for minors. That's all on our website.
Fantastic. Cool. So hey, we've got a poll to kick off, don't we?
Absolutely, we do. Hamish, would you mind just popping up the first poll question?
So that first poll is just what role you play in youth sport. So which hat are you predominantly wearing on this call tonight, just to help us understand what our audience is. And so looking at that, about 40% parents and guardians, about 35% of us the coaches, and a few administrators, and then always that wonderful other, 5% of other, which is always slightly intriguing. Brilliant. Thanks, Hamish.
Awesome. So I might just kick us off then with a quick video, actually. And this is a video that we created with Tyler Hamilton, who wanted to speak directly to parents when I asked him, just like many athletes I've spoken to over the years, to really reinforce that, he thought, and many athletes believe and know, that their parents are such a significant influence on, particularly during adolescence, on decision-making, behaviour, all that sort of thing. So just a quick video to kick us off there.
At the end of the day, the money and the fame and whatever, that's all secondary. You're trying to make your parents proud. And for whatever reason, for a son, you're trying to make your mom proud. For a parent, I think it's important to let your son or daughter know that it's okay if they, finish 5th or 15th or 50th. As long as they give their best effort, then that's okay. A lot of kids these days are out there trying to succeed, sometimes succeeding at all costs, just to make their parents proud. Make sure you're always communicating with your children. And just, in bringing up those difficult subject matters, like bring it up before your kids bring it up, and talk about what the risks are. Talk about, if you do go down that path, what it's going to lead to later. And again, being open and honest to if they have made a mistake, because if you don't feel like you're going to get that support, you're probably not going to want to talk about it.
Such a good video, such a powerful video.
Yeah, no, and yeah, he obviously American, but he, like many Kiwi athletes I've spoken to, really did highlight the influence that not only parents, but support people within his close context had on his behaviour and decision making, and the importance of open dialogue about what otherwise might not get spoken about. So that's something that obviously reinforces many of the principles of balance is better, but also something that we can refer to as we carry on tonight.
Excellent. And so we've got another poll, just to kind of help us understand the audience. So Hamish, are you able to jump that in? So what age of the young people, or either your kids, if you're a coach, what are the athletes that you're working with? So predominant sort of age brackets, and you'll see that there's a 5 to 11, 12 to 15, and a 16 or older. So we'll just give people a few moments just to fill that out for us. Cool. So yeah, again, sitting in about half are sitting in that kind of 12 to 15 age group. Cool. Thanks, Hamish. So the plan for tonight, Sian.
Yeah, so just obviously what we'll cover, just to give context and background really to the tips that we'll be talking about later in this webinar, is just to really quickly go over some background to adolescent brain development. This is obviously a really big and heavy topic, so we won't be going there, but just to zoom in on some really key features which are fundamental to decision making and to some of the skills that are really important to develop, particularly among the 12 to 15 year olds that a lot of you are working with. So We'll touch on that briefly, and then we'll get into 5 tips based on the evidence, both from New Zealand and internationally, on things that parents, coaches, administrators, and those of you who are other right now, that you can implement in sport with rangatahi, from now. So yeah,
Fantastic.
we'll kick into it.
So adolescent brain, teenage rangatahi, there's lots going on, right? So quick snapshot here just to give us some context, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are just 2 key domains of the brain that I kind of want to break down tonight a little bit at a very high level, but they are fundamental to a lot of what we'll talk about. So one of those being the prefrontal cortex. Don't worry about that name, but really what that area of the brain is responsible for are things around logic decision making, using rationale, problem solving, dealing with complex information. So that part of the brain really is responsible for that. The other part we're going to look at is the ventral striatum. Again, ignore that name, but essentially that area is looking more at it's reactive to things like sensation seeking, risk, reward, reinforcement, and it's really attracted to things that I guess adolescence is normally synonymous with, unfortunately for them, but this is kind of why. So I guess from a perspective, if we just want to put this into some perspective from a developmental view, is really during childhood, both of these areas of the brain are pretty immature in their development, as you might expect, and the coordination between them is pretty low, but we probably wouldn't expect anything more. In adulthood, however, by that stage, both of these areas are quite developed, typically by the age of around 25, and at that point, the areas of the brain are talking to each other a lot smoother, a lot more coordinated. The really complex developmental stage, which is adolescence, sits in the middle, obviously. And here we've got some particular complexities from a cognitive development perspective. So just to highlight these, when we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, it is quite slow, right? It's slower than other areas of the brain, which meaning that problem solving, moderating behavior, future planning, using logic, those sorts of things are far more challenging for an adolescent to draw on when they're making decisions. This contrasts pretty highly to what's happening with the ventral striatum in terms of sensation seeking, reward, risk, all of those things happen really quickly. So an adolescent might, the thinking process around risk or reward creates a really quick reaction, which I think you laugh, Kelly, because I know probably where your mind went there, but so typically adolescents get a bit of a bad rap potentially because of this, which isn't necessarily fair. Who knows? I'm not one to make judgment on that, but really this is why, and this is the fundamental part of the neurology that I wanted to just highlight quickly. What it really leads to, however, is accelerated decision making, particularly in the presence of peers. When there's a perceived risk or reward, and when they anticipate they might be able to get some sort of sensation they're looking for from that behaviour. So as you can imagine, this creates a bit of complexity when we're talking about clean sport, or any kind of cheating or maladaptive behaviour. If there's a potential risk to get caught, that may accelerate this decision making. If there's a perceived reward such as enhanced performance or winning, something along those lines, and again around peers, which is often what sport is, these sorts of things can make this decision making happen even faster. Remembering though that it happens without the logic and the rationale and the information that might need to be processed to make a really smart and informed decision. So these things happen pretty quickly. Just one developmental characteristic I wanted to mention at the same time is the invincibility fable. But essentially what this means is that adolescents are characteristic for understanding and maybe acknowledging that bad things might happen, but typically that they'd only happen to other people. and that it's unlikely that it would ever happen to them. Obviously, once you become an adult, you get a bit more attuned to the understanding that actually, no, it can happen to you too. But typically during adolescence, that's a really hard message to get across. And just the last point that I wanted to make really around this, the background to the cognitions here is called synaptic pruning. Again, terminology doesn't matter too much here. It's the same concept as use it or lose it, is how I like to frame it. So what this means is that the skills, the thought processes, the cognitive thinking, the things that happen in the brain during adolescence, the ones that are drawn on most frequently will get stronger and stronger and stronger. And they're the ones that will be easy for that individual to draw upon when they're an adult.
Right.
Therefore, the thinking that is developed during this phase of life is really, really important to how you will act then, but also later in life. Unfortunately, what is not practiced often in the brain during adolescence is likely to be culled, or at least not developed. So it will be harder for an individual to draw on those things later in life. So I guess just to summarize this kind of section on cognitive processing here is just the importance from a clean sport perspective, multiple perspectives, but clean sport in this chat, around really creating an opportunity frequently for adolescents to develop the skills that they require to make sound decisions during adolescence, but also to get a really sound, clean sport concept, if you will, or a mindset that is drawn towards clean sport and honest participation, and obviously away from anything untoward in that regard.
Fantastic. And, you're absolutely right. So creating sound decision-making skills, we can apply that across multiple settings in sport, right? And, particularly important for our conversation tonight. Really, really quick question that I've just picked up from the chat. Is there a difference between boys and girls?
There is, in terms of the age at which this development may occur.
Okay.
And typically the females, and this is typical, very general, it's not to say it's the case for everyone's different, I suppose, but typically females will develop in some areas of the brain faster than boys.
Cool.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of environmental factors that will also influence that, including, for example, how often they are exposed to opportunities to develop certain skills.
Fantastic. Cool. Awesome. Okay. So, getting into our tips and tricks element. So the first one being around mastery, right? So,
yeah, absolutely.
So that we love playing sport, and and we love watching sport, and in the arena of professional sport, the emphasis is on winning, and almost entirely on those kind of outcome performance. In your experience, what effect does a primary focus on winning have on clean sport?
So I guess the evidence, international, and also what I found through my studies, and actually in conversations had with many an athlete, enhancing performance and winning has been proven to be one of the, I guess, leading reasons or rationale that an athlete who has doped, if they are to talk about it afterwards, a lot of the time that is the reason as to why. So we know that may well be an ingredient, I suppose, and an influential thing to that behaviour in the end. And I suppose what I learned particularly, but I think what we know more broadly than that, is the importance of mastery having an opposing effect. Particularly what I found in my study was that mastery was one of a mastery focus, and considering mastery as a criteria for success in youth sport. That environment, but also that mindset for the individual themselves, was really important to reducing the odds they would engage in substance use to enhance their performance. So from that perspective, mastery, this is just a tip that I would give anyone working with rangatahi, is really around, wherever possible, prioritising and really supporting an environment that encourages mastery as a key focus. So that's sort of, skill development, skill improvement, mastering, focusing on the mastery of technique and tactic, and really mastering the game or the sport, as opposed to just solely looking at the outcome. One thing for sure with New Zealand adolescents was when they saw mastery as a source of sport confidence, so they actually drew confidence from learning skills and developing skills and feeling as if they'd mastered a skill. That was one of the key factors that decreased the odds that they would engage in these behaviours.
So yeah, and I mean, we think about how that lines up with our balance is better philosophy, right? Where at the moment there's an overemphasis on winning and results, and actually we want to take that focus to actually skill development, confidence building, all of those things that you just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's consistent in terms of what will also support an athlete to stay clean and develop with that mindset.
Fantastic. So, planning for choice. So as a parent, how can we prepare and empower our kids to make good decisions in difficult situations? So this is putting them in positions of needing to make decisions and testing, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it is really important that adolescents get, and I don't just mean adolescents, sorry, I would say younger than that too, that our youth really get frequent exposure to opportunities to make decisions. And that can be uncomfortable. I have a little one myself, and I wouldn't necessarily always want to give them the decision-making authority, let's be honest. But what I think is important, if that is the case, is actually to give options and say, which one would you like to choose? And it's working through that decision-making process with them. So and again, if we come back to that cognitive development and the skills required to make sound decisions and what you draw on in your brain when you're doing that, the more and more we can develop those skills during adolescence, the easier it's going to be for them to draw on that and make decisions based on their values and based on the decision they actually wanted to make. It's really important that that's developed when they're young, so they've got that skill there when they need it. The other thing that I would obviously coming from a coaching background as well, just speaking to the coaches who are in our audience tonight, in terms of a training session, it's just also reflecting on how many times in that are you strategically making a spot to pause and put in a question which is meaningful, which is either a problem solving question or is just something that the adolescents among your team are going to have to stop and actually think and get them to think of their response and maybe be able to articulate why. It doesn't mean that's going to be the right answer all the time at all, but it's about creating that safe space for them to practice those skills. And if they make a mistake or if they have no response would be a bad one, but if they make one that needs some constructive feedback, then that's fine. It's a safe space to do that. So it's about creating the opportunities to develop those skills and then hone them in as you go. And just even if you are working with the younger, if you're the group on the call tonight that's working with the younger ones, it really simple. These can start really simple, just asking questions and expecting a response. That will become the norm. So that when a more complex question or situation is faced later in life, they've got those skills, ready to draw on, and they can consider what they need to at that time.
Yep, fantastic. I think wrapping some, there's kind of a question that's popped up in that chat, and it probably relates to both the mastery and some of this decision making piece. But what age is advisable to start these sort of mastery and this decision making conversations?
If I'm honest, and this is my opinion, and so I don't have evidence to draw on right now on this, but my view would be that you do that from day dot. That the aspect of autonomy, obviously there's a extent in subject matters where there's an authority and there's only so much decision making that can be done within that.
Yeah.
But where possible, I think, and sometimes it's just the smallest things. And again, it can be that two options are provided and it's simply, do you want this or this and why? So, I mean, those conversations can happen really young. And then I think it's just about appropriately increasing the complexity of those questions or decision-making situations posed to youth as their skills develop. That won't always be a linear process for everyone according to age. Every individual would be different. But I think, our people on the call tonight, you're going to know who it is you work with best. So I think it's about meeting them where they are at and tailoring it to that. Yeah.
And I suppose that's the same kind of philosophy around that mastery piece as well. The earlier that we can start reinforcing around less about outcome, more about process, is important to embed, as young as possible, I guess, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, the earlier we can do this, the better prepared youth will be. And this happens. This is at school. This is out of sport. This is a real holistic view of an athlete here, and how we can actually use sport as an opportunity to develop these decision-making skills that they'll draw on in no matter what context they're in later in life. Yeah,
sure thing. Cool. So moving on. Oh, this is a scary one, right? So marketing, imagery that our rangatahi are exposed to on social media, they are bombarded constantly with different images. Does it have a negative effect from a clean sport perspective? And if so, how can parents start to address some of this stuff, or coaches start to address some of this?
Yeah, so just first question there, yes, absolutely. It has an effect. Some, I guess, materialize into behaviour. Some perhaps just a concept or an image that's put in a young person's mind, and they're important things to consider, regardless. One of the reasons that I asked the age, or put the criteria up to 15 and 16 or older in our poll question, was really up until 15, and sorry, this is data from my PhD. Up until 15, it wasn't as influential, purely because the engagement with social media, if I'm honest, and engagement in more public venues that were less controlled, I suppose, didn't happen as much under the age of 15. Once adolescents hit 15, however, media had a far more significant influence on them, and particularly in the areas of body image that was associated with being an athlete, and the use of supplements associated with being an athlete. So absolutely it has an effect. And I just to answer the second part of your question there, yeah. What can be done about it? From what I know and from my experience to date, conversations around this and actually critical thinking skills and developing critical thinking about the media that's consumed, about imagery that might be seen, is really crucial. And again, it's around the thinking processes and developing that as a skill that a young person can draw on when they see an image, see an ad, whatever it may be. So just a couple of examples of that, potentially. Just in casual conversation is around, like, do you actually believe that image is real, or do you think maybe it's been photoshopped? Yeah. Even just planting that query in adolescent's mind, you may not see the impact of that, but perhaps, just perhaps, later on when they see another image, if that's repeated for them in their mind, that just starts that questioning process of maybe that's not what it appears to be. Another one is around, I wonder what evidence there is to support this. So if there's a claim that's been made somewhere by someone or something or some media source, just querying, where is the evidence behind that? Or do you think that's based on fact? And again, just planting those questions, it may well start a really worthwhile conversation. It may not. You may get crickets. But regardless, it may have planted, and it may be a thought that's drawn on later. And when it comes to supplements, just another query to pose, and if we've got any nutritionists in the room, hopefully they're thankful for this. But just if sometimes, I'm not saying all supplements, but when some are promoted, there may well be a really helpful food first alternative, and which is cheaper and potentially, have far more nutritious value to a young person, particularly for whom, supplements may not be recommended anyway. So it's just worth, starting those critical conversations or critical thinking skills early, and just planting that I wonder ... in their mind. That may be the thing that interrupts seeing an image and acting. If that I wonder concept is in their mind, that could be really helpful to changing behaviour, or at least influencing it in a positive way.
Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? It's just kind of going, how do we help these kids make better decisions? How can we prompt them to just to think about, you know, as you say, do I actually need it, or is that Photoshop? This is about role modelling, right? So we've spoken about some of the environmental influences in the context of clean sport, but what about the influence of whānau or within the home? You know, the role that parents play in role modelling some of this clean sport behaviour.
Yeah, so this is a quite an interesting one, where it's more around norms. You know, the norms that an athlete sees or perceives as being, you know, what's acceptable in their environment. Their perception, we have to remember that that's reality. So if they think that everybody uses a supplement and that you can't go to the gym without using a supplement and it must be for everybody, or if they really do think that prevalence is so high, you know, everyone else is doing it, I may as well do it too. If that is the perception that an adolescent holds, then we need to respect that that's what they think is the case. So it's really important that even if things are happening in their environment around them, that at least it's discussed and it's actually shining a light on why. And, you know, sometimes there might be a good reason. Someone in the whānau may actually be deficient in something. And if that's the case, then they may well need something. If it is that they're in pain, they may be taking a painkiller. But having those open conversations and explaining why things are the way they are, that can be what is required to break down a perception or break down the thinking that someone has that this is just normal. We don't, I guess, where I'd hope we can steer away from is the normalization of using a substance related to sport, you know, where it's not required.
Yeah, and so I think one of the questions that came through in the chat before was, what about supplements for diet restrictions due to allergies or choice? And so it's we're not saying a blanket, you know, cross out of all of this sort of stuff, but actually understanding the needs of, you know, the individuals and being able to make informed decisions as well.
Yeah, and I think those conversations can only help those informed decisions because there's a why, and adolescents start to understand that actually there's good reason for this sometimes. I think the other thing just to highlight, we have a supplement decision-making guide on our website, and that can be a really useful tool, you know, for people to go through, adolescents in particular, but to work through and actually understand why it is they are thinking about using a supplement. And a lot of the time, they'll get, you know, some ways through that and actually go, I don't need it anyway.
Yeah.
However, if for example someone's iron deficient or something of that nature, then, you know, that's a medicinal need, and that would be dealt with, you know, potentially through another avenue, through doctors, through performance nutritionists, through whomever like that. And, you know, our decision-making guide helps with other factors too, like batch testing. So, you know, while we would love to, for all rangatahi and all athletes actually to take a food-first approach, particularly when there is a need for a supplement, while we don't recommend or endorse any at Drug Free Sport New Zealand, we do want to support clean athletes in making good decisions. And if it is they decide to use a supplement, then there are things they should consider, like batch testing by a third party, and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of information on our website on what does that actually mean and how they can find that out. But just the crucial piece is making that decision, getting that information before making the decision to use anything. It's too late after the fact, and, you know, it's an expensive business as well. You know, we don't want rangatahi feeling that they have to spend what money they have or asking their parents for funds to pay for supplements, when sometimes and often there's a nutritious option through food.
Excellent. And there's Anya Anderson has pointed out to us on the chat that there was an excellent story published on Newsroom about how increased nutrition improved the performance of New Zealand female rowers, and it was
Yes.
about that food first approach.
Yep, absolutely. And so, you see it from the top as well. And that can be an important message to share with our young athletes too, is that, hey, if our top performing gold medalists, if they don't require some of these things, then actually, does a youth athlete? So again, it's posing those questions and having those, I guess, more fruitful conversations rather than don't do that or etc. Which just, it's about developing those skills.
Yeah, cool. And that's, we talk about role modeling at home. So what does that look like from a parent's perspective as well, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the threats. What my parents, coaches sitting at home now going, oh, I'm scared now. But are there any common indicators that people should look out for that might suggest a threat to clean athletes?
Yeah, and I suppose if we reflect back on some of the stuff we've spoken about tonight already, a lot of it is just actually the contrast of what we've spoken about. So we've spoken about the importance of a mastery environment, for example, and a mastery focus. So I guess particularly in my PhD, but this is also consistent with evidence worldwide, is that when success is defined by winning in performance, we know that increases an adolescent's odds of using a substance in sport. And we know that mastery decreases that. So I suppose, on reflection of that, if you can see that your rangatahi are either in the mindset or in an environment where performance is everything, then that's potentially a red flag. Just not necessarily saying that they're going to go and dope. That's quite extreme from what we're talking about here. But if you do notice things like that, then it's important to I guess address that really early before it manifests into anything material. The other factor we've mentioned around having voice and choice. So if your rangatahi either feel or are in an environment where they can't make decisions, they've got no say over what they consume, over their participation in sport, and the way that they compete, those sorts of things, they just the flip side of what we're saying around planning for the opportunity for your young people to make decisions and voice how they feel. The opposite to all of these things, I think, are just red flags to be aware of. They may not be anything, but equally they might be quite significant to limiting the opportunity to develop the skills that we want them to have, obviously, as clean athletes, both then and in the future.
And I think if I think back to the video that you showed at the start, where he talked about needing to have some of those difficult conversations and being able to have open and honest conversations with young people about some of the stuff, so that you can help them through what is some potentially tricky situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially for our those on the webinar right now who are with, our youngest of the athletes we're talking about here, I don't think there's any harm in starting those conversations early. It probably makes it far easier to have them later in adolescence, because they'll just be the norm. It'll just be expected that you have conversations about things that, other people may not talk about. And, a lot of these things can be recognised when they're small, before they are actually an issue. And I guess that's an ideal world, isn't it? But ideally we can get in the practice of that and having those conversations early.
Fantastic. So we've got a quick poll here.
I'll go back.
Oh yeah, we don't want to give away the answers just yet. So Hamish, can you throw that last poll up for us, please? So just as a bit of a check-in for our audience, are you aware of clean sport resources available to you and to your rangatahi? Oh, no is winning. It's a close race.
Yeah.
But I think no might have that one there.
Yeah.
There you go. About 60%. Not necessarily aware of resources that are available. So, Sian, what answers have you got for us?
Well, I just wanted to highlight, we have several more than this available, but Drug Free Sport we have a wide range of resources available. They're all free of charge and they are all accessible and available anytime on our website. So there really is no limitation in terms, or barrier, I should say, for people to access this. We have 5 e-learning courses, 2 of which I highlighted here just because I thought they were potentially most relevant to our audience tonight. So Clean Sport 101 for both rangatahi and parents, coaches, etc. That's only a 15-minute one, so it's a fairly easy grab in terms of just being aware of what you need to know quite generally, and then other modules could get into the specifics if you want to delve a bit deeper. That'll also be launched shortly in Te Reo Māori, so Clean Sport 101 will be available across the board for our widest audience yet. Also, we have a support person module in our e-learning suite, and obviously for our audience tonight, that's poignant. That gives some really practical tips, just actually at a training session, for example, how you can do that, or at home, how you can support clean athletes a little more. I've mentioned the supplement decision-making guide. From my perspective, that tool is key for rangatahi, but also of real value to their support people, whoever they may be. That's key. And as I say, plenty more available on our website, all free of charge, and that includes getting workshops and webinars delivered directly to you, your teams, your youth athletes, coaches, etc.
One of the things that's come through in the questions is around where people could find more information about that sort of adolescent brain development, where they could access some research and things like that, because, obviously sparked a bit of interest at the start.
Yeah, no. Oh, awesome. It is a really interesting topic. I'm glad that you share my interest in that. Not everyone does. But no, there's a lot around adolescent development, both brain development, but just actually developmental characteristics. Typically, it'll go across the lifespan, and really you'll be interested in solely in the adolescent phase, I suppose, which in some texts will go from 11 to 18, others a bit more specific from 13 to 18. But any search of adolescent development or adolescent neurological development would likely land you in the right place. If you have access to university resources at all, some of you may, there is typically quite a lot in the developmental psychology areas, which would be really interesting if that's of interest to you.
Fantastic. So key takeaways, key points that people can take home with them?
Yeah, so I really just summed up here as, without getting text that's too tiny to read, and trying to sum up what is a really big and really important topic. Just that real focus on mastery, not only from the adolescent's perspective, that is really, really important that they themselves gain confidence and strive towards mastery, but it's so important that that's endorsed, supported, and encouraged in their environment. So by their parents, by their coaches, by any other support person around them. It's really hard for them to hold on to mastery as a key focus when others are really reinforcing performance. So a conducive environment to mastery is really, really important. Planning for choice, we've spoken about this in depth, I think, but really just strategically planning repeated exposure for rangatahi to make decisions and where possible action that decision as well. So actually letting them make the call and then being able to actually implement the behaviour that they decided on. For them, it's actually a really empowering experience, and it will really get them used to that skill of decision making and action. Media mindfulness, just on that topic, it's big, and realistically we know they're exposed to media, marketing, etc. all the time, particularly if they use social media a lot. So the best we can do is to really develop the skills of curiosity, critical thinking, questioning, discussing with their peers, but being really curious about the validity of what they're looking at. Just those critical questioning skills they're so important across the board, but this is a great place to practice it. Modeling behavior, so just getting an awareness of what your adolescent may think is normal. What is their perceived norm? sometimes it needs to be challenged because it may be factually incorrect and having a really negative impact, but remembering for them it's reality. So having those conversations as well is really important. And just around assessing the threat, that again, it comes down to awareness, but just being mindful of things that might be going on in your adolescent's environment. Either, some of it might be created for them, some of it might be environmental and in a culture that you're not comfortable with. And just on that, I just wanted to highlight that if there is ever a threat assessed, or if any of you ever had concerns around the environment or something that was going on for your rangatahi in sport, then we have a speak out line at Drug Free Sport New Zealand where we either anonymously or confidentially, those things can be reported. And again, that's just part of what we're trying to do in supporting clean athletes and clean sport.
Cool. One of the questions that's come through on the chat is around the use of supplements in New Zealand, and how rife is it with our rangatahi, with our youth, actually?
Yeah, so I, in terms of my study, I've got actual data is probably the easiest thing to talk about. I think we all have a perception. Well, it depends on where you are and what you've seen and been exposed to, of course. But the sporting environments I've been in, I've definitely seen a lot of supplement use. But in terms of data, 92% of the participants in my research indicated that they'd used at least one supplement in the last 6 months to enhance performance. Now that sounds quite extreme. It's not necessarily haven't deciphered what type of supplement we're talking about when we say that big number. So, for some it may have been a very benign type of supplement where we're going, okay, that's very much like an electrolyte solution or something like that, rather than something which we would deem, whoa, why are you using that when you're so young? But regardless, it does show that it's normal. It was perceived as a norm, and rightly so. Adolescents may be thinking everyone else is using things, so why shouldn't I? Again, we come back to those cognitive processes and the importance of having the skills available to critically kind of evaluate those decisions.
And because this is all kind of intended as a way of how do we best help our young people be the best that they want to be, reach their potential. So, our ability to give them some skills and some tools, and then understanding what our role is as parents or coaches in that setting as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I before doing a PhD, I didn't really, if I'm honest, stop and consider, but how does this actually compute, or how is this processed with the cognitive capacity of an adolescent? Because they're not mini adults. We know that on so many levels, and the way that we might think about something as an adult can't necessarily be directly translated to the way that an adolescent may digest the same information or react to the same stimulus. So it's really important, I think, that we kind of meet them where they are and then support them there, rather than supporting them where we think they might be based on how we would react.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, encouraging people just to throw any other questions they've got in the chat. We've got a couple more minutes that we can unpack any more of this stuff. But is there anything else that you wanted to I guess, reinforce, Sian, from tonight?
In all honesty, I just would really love if people, this is a really important topic, and clearly this many of you have invested an hour of your time when you've probably been on the screen for weeks now on Zoom calls, etc. So clearly you recognise the importance of this, and I just really encourage you to extend that, have the confidence to talk about, I guess, what you've learnt tonight, but also engage in the resources available to you. As I say, they're all free of charge. They're all completely accessible to you in various formats. However you think that, your peers, but also your rangatahi and their peers would best learn. If half of you, 63% of you didn't know what resources were available to you, the likelihood is that those in your wider sporting community don't either. So I would really encourage you to go out there, talk about what you've learnt tonight, talk about the importance that you see in clean sport, and direct people to our website. They can then take from it what they will, but there's plenty there for everybody.
So one of the quick questions that's come through is, what about awareness of prescription or over-the-counter medicines and how they might impact sport?
Yeah, again, to be honest, these are the types of things you can learn through our website, particularly because, there is a prohibited list. There are substances which are prohibited or banned for athletes of any age to take. So it's really important that, I guess, adolescents are taught from a really young age that, hey, if you want to be an athlete, if you want to compete in sport, there are special rules that apply to you. You're a special, very special part of the population, but you also have special rules that apply to you. Just like some industries do. In this sense, if you want to be an athlete, you've got to be really aware of every single thing that you put in your body, on your body, eye drops, nasal sprays, the whole works. You've just got to be aware of what those things are. Now, we provide medication checking tools on our website as well. So, there's no harm in an athlete or a parent or a coach at any age and stage typing in what it is required or, about to be used. Hopefully before it's used, please before it's used.
Before it's used.
But yeah, you check that on there and we can bounce back straight away to tell you whether or not it's prohibited in sport or not. And that itself is good learning and it's a good practice to get into.
An interesting question, really, really quickly before we wrap up, is we're seeing lots of teenage boys using protein powders. Mum's saying that it keeps the kids full, but there's... Teenage boys eat a lot. I don't have a teenage boy yet. I'm sure it'll happen. But what is some advice that maybe you could give in that situation?
Yeah, so, and I've heard this question many a time, as you can probably imagine. And I fully understand that, and actually from a developmental perspective, physically, that would fit. They are starving all the time, even when they've just eaten. And they're growing very rapidly in many ways, cognitively as well, as you know from tonight. So that takes a lot of energy and it demands a lot. So what is really important, I think, and again, this is I suppose opinion, but also you'll see it in our supplement decision-making guide as well. Prior to engaging in buying or using a protein powder, some of that cost that will take to purchase that, perhaps, and this would be my advice where it's available, is to see a nutritionist instead and get some proper advice around, are you getting the best out of your food, potentially your rest and recovery as well, maximizing all of those really positive, really clean sport behaviours, maximizing all of those before looking into the use of a substance. And then if that is the case, then obviously further through that decision-making guide, you've got some really key practical tips on which one you may choose to use and not. Again, though, we don't recommend the use of any, but we do want to provide the right information to help Ngātahi develop good decision-making skills around this, and just let them know all the factors that need to be considered prior to using anything.
Amazing. Hey, look, I'm going to wrap us up there, Sian. Certainly, I took a lot out of this conversation, and right from the start of that video, talking about, the importance of communication and the importance of talking to our young people about some of this stuff, having those difficult conversations, but creating an environment where we can help them plan for choice, where we can support their decision-making skills, and frequent development of skills through that adolescent age. The more they practice it, the more ingrained it's going to be, and the more, they'll carry those skills through into adulthood. So the importance of the foundation of that rangatahi age and building up those decision-making skills. I would like to thank you so very, very much. We've got lots and lots of comments coming through in the chat now to say thank you, great advice, learned a lot. Thank you for your time. As you say, everyone's been on Teams and on Zoom calls for quite a few hours over the last little while.
Haven't we just?
Thank you so very much. Thank you everyone for tuning in on this call and contributing to the conversation. For those of you tuning in from Auckland, kia kaha, stay strong. The rest of us, and Sian, we're thinking of you.
Thank you.
In that level 4 lockdown. If you want to find out more about Bounces Better, I encourage you to go and have a look at the Bounces Better website and sign up to receive the e-newsletter. And I'm just going to close with our karakia. So, te tawa mai runga, te tawa mai raro, te tawa mai roto, te tawa mai waho, kia tau ai te mauri tū, kia tau ai te mauri ora, tūtū whakamaua kia teina, homie, huie, tai kie. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you so very much, Sian. Thank you everyone for being on the call.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody.